The cold bit into Arthur's skin like a relentless predator, gnawing at the edges of his thin jacket. The streets of Los Angeles were alive with noise, horns honking, faint laughter from distant restaurants, and the occasional shout from another homeless person staking their claim to a corner. Arthur shuffled down the alley, his breath visible in the frosty night air. At 65 years old, he had been homeless for nearly a decade, but tonight, something felt different. A faint hum caught his attention. It wasn't the rumble of a city bus or the screech of a passing train. It was something sharper, closer. He squinted into the darkness and saw the faint glow of hazard lights. Curiosity overcame caution as Arthur stepped closer. The car was a sleek, futuristic-looking vehicle, unlike anything he'd seen up close. A man crouched by the rear tire, fumbling with tools. He was dressed simply, black jeans and a hoodie, but there was something about his demeanor that stood out. The man looked out of place, almost vulnerable in this setting. "You need help there?" Arthur called out, his voice gruff but kind. The man looked up, startled, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. "Oh yeah," he stammered. "It's the tire. And I think something's wrong with the battery, too." Arthur stepped closer, his steps slow and deliberate. "Fancy car like this, I'd bet it's got more sensors than sense," he muttered, a faint grin breaking his weathered face. "Mind if I take a look?" The man hesitated, but then stepped aside, gesturing toward the car. Arthur crouched down, inspecting the wheel. His hands, calloused and rough from years of hard labor, moved with surprising precision. "This ain't your standard flat," Arthur murmured. "Looks like your rim's bent. That's going to take more than a patch job." The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Great. Just my luck." Arthur stood and looked him over. "You got a jack in the trunk?" "Yeah, I think so." Arthur gestured for him to pop the trunk. The man did, revealing a meticulously organized set of tools. Arthur whistled. "Well, look at that. Most folks don't even know where their spare tire is." The two worked in silence for a few minutes, Arthur guiding the man as they swapped out the tire. Despite his years on the street, Arthur's movements were efficient, almost professional. "You've done this before," the man said, breaking the silence. Arthur chuckled. "Used to work in a shop, back before life happened." He didn't elaborate, and the man didn't press. When the tire was finally replaced, Arthur stepped back, brushing his hands on his jacket. "That should get you where you're going, but that battery might still give you trouble. You'll want to get it checked." The man nodded, pulling out his wallet. "Here, let me pay you for your time." Arthur raised a hand, shaking his head firmly. "Nah, keep your money. Just glad I could help." The man hesitated, then slipped his wallet back into his pocket. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Arthur replied. He turned to leave but paused when the man called out again. "Wait!" Arthur turned back and the man stepped forward, holding out a business card. "If you ever need anything, call this number." Arthur took the card reluctantly, glancing at it. The name on it meant nothing to him, just another corporate title he didn't recognize. "Appreciate it," he said, tucking the card into his jacket. The man smiled, a hint of relief in his expression. "Thank you. Really." Arthur nodded and turned away, his figure disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Behind him, the car's engine purred to life, and the man drove off into the night. Arthur didn't even bother looking at the card again as he made his way back to the overpass he called home. To him, it was just another night, a rare moment of decency in a world that had shown him little of it. What he didn't realize was that the man he'd just helped wasn't just anyone, and that card, it was about to change his life. The night stretched on, colder than usual. Arthur huddled under the bridge, wrapping himself tightly in the threadbare blanket he'd salvaged from a dumpster months ago. The city quieted as the hours passed, but his mind kept drifting back to the encounter with the man and his fancy car. It wasn't every day someone like that crossed paths with someone like him. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. "Doesn't matter who he was," Arthur muttered to himself. "Just glad I could help." Meanwhile, across town, the man Arthur had helped sat in his hotel suite, staring at the business card on his bedside table. His mind replayed the encounter over and over. The old man's refusal to take money struck a chord. In a world where everyone seemed to want something, this stranger had given freely without expectation. With a sigh, he leaned back in his chair, pulling out his phone. A quick Google search on homelessness in Los Angeles revealed startling statistics. Tens of thousands of people living on the streets, many of them with stories like Arthur's, lives upended by bad luck, lost jobs, or personal tragedies. The man's thoughts raced. "There's more to this," he whispered. Back under the bridge, Arthur woke just before dawn, his stomach growling. He shuffled through the few belongings he had: a torn paperback novel, a rusty can opener, and a tin of expired beans. Breakfast wasn't exactly a feast, but it would keep him going. He decided to head toward the downtown shelters, hoping to snag a free meal and maybe catch some warmth before the day's hustle began. As he walked, Arthur passed by a few familiar faces, other homeless individuals who occupied the same corners and alleyways. "Hey, Arthur!" a younger man called out, waving. His name was Terry, a wiry kid barely in his 20s who had been on the streets for a couple of years. "Morning, kid," Arthur said, nodding. "Someone said they saw you messing with some rich guy's car last night. That true?" Arthur chuckled. "What can I say? Even rich folks get flat tires." Terry grinned. "Man, if I were you, I'd have taken every dollar he offered. They got more money than they know what to do with." Arthur shrugged. "Ain't about that. Sometimes you just help 'cause it's the right thing to do." Terry shook his head, laughing. "You're one of a kind, old man." Arthur smiled faintly and kept walking. Deep down, he didn't see himself as anything special. He'd made mistakes in his life, plenty of them, and helping people, even strangers, was his small way of trying to make up for them. Later that day, the sun was high in the sky, but Arthur found himself growing more exhausted as he wandered through the city. He ended up at a small park bench, pulling the business card from his jacket pocket. He flipped it over, reading the name again. Elon Musk, he mumbled aloud, the name unfamiliar. He squinted at the company logos printed below. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink. It meant nothing to him. He figured the man might have been some tech big shot. But what would a guy like that want with someone like Arthur? He considered throwing the card away, but something stopped him. Across town, Elon Musk sat in his office, scrolling through emails when his assistant entered. "Sir, your car issue last night? Was everything resolved?" Elon nodded, a faint smile crossing his lips. "It was." His assistant tilted her head curiously. "What's the smile about?" "Met someone interesting," Elon replied, leaning back in his chair. "An older guy, homeless, helped me without hesitation, refused money." Her brows furrowed. "That's unusual." Elon tapped his fingers on the desk. "Yeah, and I want to find him." "Find him?" she echoed. "Yes, I have an idea, a big one." As night fell, Arthur found himself back under the bridge, staring at the card again. Something about the whole situation gnawed at him, though he couldn't quite explain why. He tucked the card back into his jacket, shaking his head. "Probably nothing," he muttered. But deep down, he had a feeling this wasn't the last time he'd cross paths with the man from the night before. Arthur awoke to the soft light of dawn creeping through the cracks of the overpass. His joints ached from the cold, and he rubbed his hands together to chase away the stiffness. Around him, the city stirred to life. Commuters bustling to work, cars honking in the distance, and the faint aroma of coffee wafting from a nearby vendor. As he rummaged through his few belongings, Arthur noticed the corner of the business card sticking out from his jacket pocket. The events of the previous night felt surreal now, like a dream he wasn't entirely sure had happened. His stomach growled, interrupting his thoughts. Food first, he decided. Questions about fancy cars and mysterious men could wait. In a nearby cafe, a small TV screen flickered to life as customers sipped their morning coffees. The news anchor's voice cut through the hum of chatter. In breaking news, tech mogul Elon Musk was reportedly spotted in downtown Los Angeles late last night. Eyewitnesses say Musk was seen assisting with a minor vehicle issue, but the details remain unclear. This sighting has sparked a flurry of online speculation about why the billionaire was in the area. Arthur, standing just outside the cafe, paused mid-step. The name jolted him, and he glanced through the window at the TV. There, clear as day, was a grainy photo of the man from last night, his hoodie slightly pulled back, revealing a familiar face. Arthur blinked, his mind racing. "That can't be him," he muttered under his breath. A wave of disbelief washed over him. The man he'd helped wasn't just another stranger in need. He was Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur whose name and face dominated headlines. Arthur leaned against the wall for support, his thoughts a whirlwind. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the card, staring at the name printed neatly in bold letters. Elon Musk. For hours, Arthur wrestled with his thoughts. He sat on a park bench, flipping the card between his fingers. "What would I even say if I called?" he muttered to himself. "Thanks for letting me fix your tire. What do you want from me now?" Doubt crept in. Maybe it was all a fluke. Maybe the card didn't mean anything, and calling would just lead to more disappointment. Arthur had seen his fair share of empty promises, but then he remembered the man's words from the night before. "If you ever need anything, call this number." Arthur sighed, feeling the weight of the decision. It wasn't just about curiosity. It was about the faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to change everything. He finally found a payphone near the edge of a busy street. His hands trembled as he inserted a few coins and dialed the number on the card. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Tesla headquarters, how may I direct your call?" Arthur froze for a moment, caught off guard. "I'm trying to reach, Mr. Elon Musk." The receptionist's tone softened. "May I ask who's calling?" Arthur hesitated. "Just Arthur. He gave me this number last night." There was a brief pause. "One moment, please." As the hold music played, Arthur's nerves threatened to get the better of him. What if this was a mistake? What if they laughed at him or hung up? But then, the music stopped. "Arthur?" a familiar voice said, warm and clear. Arthur's breath caught. "Yeah, it's me. I wasn't sure if—" "I'm so glad you called," Elon interrupted, his tone sincere. "I was hoping you would." Arthur's skepticism flared. "Why? What's a guy like you want with someone like me?" Elon chuckled softly. "Last night wasn't just about fixing my car. You reminded me of something important. Kindness without expectation. That's rare." Arthur didn't know how to respond. "I'd like to meet with you," Elon continued. "If you're up for it, come by Tesla headquarters. I'll make sure everything's arranged for you." Arthur hesitated, the doubt creeping back in. "Why would I do that?" "Because you've got a story worth hearing," Elon said, "and I think you can help me with something big." After hanging up the phone, Arthur leaned against the payphone, his mind spinning. He didn't trust easily, but something in Elon's voice had felt genuine. For the first time in years, he felt like someone truly saw him, not just as another homeless man, but as a person with value. Arthur glanced at the card one last time, then slipped it back into his pocket. "Guess I've got nothing to lose," he muttered. With that, Arthur began walking, each step carrying him closer to a world he never imagined he'd be part of. The lobby of Tesla headquarters was unlike anything Arthur had ever seen. The glass walls stretched impossibly high, shimmering as sunlight filtered through. The polished marble floors reflected the bustling movements of employees, each of them dressed sharply, purpose in every stride. Arthur hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of his appearance. Despite his best efforts, the second-hand jacket and worn shoes felt out of place in this world of pristine suits and cutting-edge technology. "Can I help you, sir?" a young woman at the reception desk asked, her smile professional but warm. Yeah," Arthur said, fumbling for the business card. "I'm here to see Elon Musk. He, told me to come." Her eyebrows raised slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Your name, sir?" "Arthur." "Just a moment." She typed something into her computer, then picked up a sleek phone. "Mr. Musk?" "Yes, he's here. I'll send him up." Arthur's heart raced as she gestured toward a nearby elevator. "Take this to the top floor. Mr. Musk is expecting you." "Top floor?" Arthur echoed, glancing nervously at the gleaming elevator doors. "Yes, sir." Swallowing his anxiety, Arthur stepped inside the elevator. The doors closed with a quiet whoosh, and the smooth ascent began. When the elevator doors opened, Arthur was greeted by a sprawling office filled with natural light. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and minimalist furniture gave the space a modern but welcoming feel. Standing near a large desk was Elon Musk, dressed in a simple blazer and jeans. He smiled warmly as he approached. "Arthur?" Elon said, extending a hand. "It's good to see you again." Arthur shook his hand, still feeling out of place. Wasn't sure I'd come." "I'm glad you did," Elon replied, gesturing toward a comfortable-looking chair. "Have a seat." Arthur sat down cautiously, his hands resting on his knees. "So what's all this about? I'm not used to billionaires inviting me to their offices." Elon chuckled. "Fair enough. Let me explain." He leaned forward, his tone earnest. "When you helped me the other night, you reminded me of something I've been losing sight of. It's easy to get caught up in business, innovation, and big ideas, but sometimes the most meaningful connections happen in the simplest moments." Arthur shifted uncomfortably, unsure of where this was going. "All I did was change a tire." "It was more than that," Elon said. "You didn't have to help me. You didn't even ask for anything in return. That kind of selflessness is rare." Arthur shrugged. "I just did what anyone should do." "That's exactly the point," Elon said, his eyes lighting up. "You showed me how far a little kindness can go, and it got me thinking about something I've wanted to do for a while, but didn't know where to start." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A project to help people like you," Elon said. "The homeless, the forgotten, the ones who've slipped through the cracks. You've seen that world firsthand. I think your perspective could help shape something meaningful." Arthur stared at him, disbelief etched on his face. "You're telling me you want my help? A homeless guy who barely gets by every day?" "Yes," Elon said without hesitation. "Why me?" "Because you understand what it's like," Elon replied. "I can throw money at the problem, sure, but if I really want to make a difference, I need to listen to the people who've lived it." Arthur leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. This had to be a dream. Things like this didn't happen in real life, especially not to people like him. "I don't know what to say," Arthur admitted. "You don't have to decide right now," Elon said, his tone gentle. "Take some time to think about it. But if you're willing, I'd like to work with you to create something that could change lives." Arthur nodded slowly, still processing. "What exactly would I be doing?" "Sharing your insights, for starters," Elon explained. "Helping design programs that actually work for the people they're meant to help. You'd have a voice in the process, and I'd make sure you're taken care of while we work on it." Before Arthur could respond, Elon stood and gestured toward the windows. "Come on, let me show you something." Arthur followed him, and they stepped onto a balcony overlooking a massive facility. Below, dozens of engineers and designers worked on Tesla vehicles, their movements precise and purposeful. "This is what we're good at," Elon said. "Building things, innovating. But none of this matters if we can't use it to make the world better." Arthur nodded, the weight of the moment settling in. For years, he'd felt invisible, like the world had passed him by. But now, standing here, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. As the meeting came to an end, Elon handed Arthur an envelope. "There's a little something in here to help you get started. A place to stay, new clothes, whatever you need. If you decide to join me, just let my assistant know. Either way, thank you for what you did." Arthur accepted the envelope reluctantly. "I'll think about it." Elon smiled. "That's all I ask." As Arthur left Tesla headquarters, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. He couldn't help but wonder, could this really be the start of something new? Arthur shuffled down the street with the envelope still clutched in his hand, its weight feeling heavier than it should. He hadn't opened it yet, unsure if he even wanted to. Part of him was convinced that this was all a cruel joke, a moment of kindness that would unravel into disappointment. But as he passed a quiet park, curiosity got the better of him. Sitting on a bench, he carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of crisp bills, along with a note. "Arthur, this is just a start to help you get back on your feet. Use it for whatever you need. I hope you'll decide to join me, but no matter what, I'm rooting for you. Elon." Arthur counted the money, $2,000. It wasn't a fortune, but to him, it felt like more than he'd ever seen at once. He sat back, staring at the note. No one had ever given him anything like this before, let alone trusted him with it. For years he'd been treated as invisible, a nuisance to be avoided. And now, a man like Elon Musk was offering him not just help, but a chance to do something meaningful. Arthur decided to take a chance. He used part of the money to book a cheap motel room, giving himself a few days of warmth and a decent bed. For the first time in years, he showered properly, scrubbing away the layers of grime that had become his second skin. At a thrift store, he bought clean clothes, nothing fancy, but enough to feel presentable. He stared at himself in the mirror, almost not recognizing the man staring back. "You clean up all right," he muttered to himself, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Over the next few days, Arthur spent time reflecting. He walked through the city, observing the world with fresh eyes. He passed other homeless people huddled in doorways, their faces etched with the same weariness he'd known. He thought about Terry, the young man he'd seen just days ago, and the countless others like him. Finally, after a week of weighing his options, Arthur made his decision. He used the motel phone to call Elon's office, his voice steady but nervous. "This is Arthur," he said when the assistant answered. "I'm in." Within hours, a car arrived at the motel to pick him up. Arthur climbed into the back seat, his hands resting uneasily on his knees. The driver offered polite conversation, but Arthur was too lost in thought to respond much. By the time they arrived at Tesla headquarters, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. When Arthur stepped out of the car, he was greeted by Elon himself, who extended a hand and smiled. "Welcome back," Elon said. Arthur shook his hand, nodding. "Let's see what you've got in mind." Elon led him inside, giving him a tour of the facility. This time, Arthur saw more than just the sleek offices and advanced technology. He saw people, engineers, designers, and staff, all working with passion and focus. "This is what we do," Elon explained as they walked. "We solve problems, but the world's biggest problems don't always have simple solutions. That's where people like you come in." Arthur frowned. "People like me?" Elon nodded. "You've lived the reality. You know what it's like to be out there, ignored and forgotten. Like I said before, I can throw all the money in the world at a problem, but without understanding it, I'll never fix it. That's where I need your help." Elon led Arthur into a conference room where a group of people were waiting. Among them were social workers, architects, and urban planners. "This is the team," Elon said, introducing them one by one. "We're working on a project to tackle homelessness in a way that hasn't been done before. Affordable modular housing, job training programs, and community support systems. But we need real insight into what works and what doesn't." Arthur felt the weight of their gazes on him. "And you think I can help with that?" "I know you can," Elon said. For the next hour, Arthur sat with the team, answering their questions and sharing his experiences. At first, he was hesitant, but as the conversation flowed, he began to open up. He talked about the challenges of finding safe shelter, the stigma of homelessness, and the small acts of kindness that made a difference. By the end of the meeting, the team was buzzing with ideas, and Arthur felt a strange sense of pride. For the first time in years, his voice had been heard. After the meeting, Elon pulled Arthur aside. "I meant what I said about taking care of you," he said. "We're setting you up with a place to live, and I want you to work with us full-time on this project. Your insight is invaluable." Arthur's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Elon replied. Arthur's throat tightened. He hadn't had a place to call home in years, let alone a steady job. The offer felt too good to be true, but the sincerity in Elon's voice was undeniable. "All right," Arthur said finally. "I'm in." Elon smiled. "Good. This is just the beginning." That night, as Arthur settled into his new apartment, a modest but comfortable space provided by Tesla, he felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, and a cautious hope for the future. He didn't know where this journey would take him, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a purpose. And that, Arthur realized, was worth everything. Arthur's first few weeks at Tesla were surreal. Every morning he woke in his small but cozy apartment, took a real shower, and put on fresh clothes. For someone who had spent years scavenging for basics, these simple acts felt almost luxurious. At the office, his role grew clearer. He wasn't just a token addition to the project. His input was actively shaping Elon's ambitious initiative. The team worked tirelessly on designs for modular housing units, efficient, sustainable, and easy to assemble. Arthur shared insights about what the homeless truly needed, from secure storage spaces to community-centered designs. He often told them, "It's not just about giving people a roof, it's about giving them a reason to believe life can get better." The team listened, and his words began to translate into tangible plans. Elon, ever the strategist, decided it was time to bring public attention to the initiative. He called a press conference to announce the project, and much to Arthur's surprise, he was asked to join. "Are you sure about this?" Arthur asked nervously, adjusting the collar of his new shirt. "You're the heart of this project," Elon said. "People need to hear your story." The press conference was held at Tesla headquarters, with dozens of reporters and cameras present. Elon spoke first, explaining the vision behind the initiative. Then, to Arthur's shock, he gestured for him to step forward. Arthur approached the podium, his hands trembling. For a moment he considered walking away, but then he saw the faces in the crowd, some curious, some skeptical, and some quietly rooting for him. He took a deep breath and began. "My name is Arthur, and for the past 10 years I've lived on the streets. I've slept under bridges, in alleys, and in shelters when I was lucky. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to wonder if anyone sees you as a person." He paused, his voice steadying as he continued. "When I met Elon, I didn't know who he was. He was just someone who needed help, and I did what I could. I never expected anything in return. But that one moment changed my life." Arthur went on to share his story, how he'd once been an engineer, how life had fallen apart after the death of his wife, and how he'd struggled to survive ever since. "This project isn't just about giving people homes," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "It's about giving people hope, and I'm living proof that hope can change everything." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in years, Arthur felt seen, not as a homeless man, but as someone with a voice worth hearing. Arthur's speech quickly went viral. News outlets ran headlines like, "From Homeless to Hero, How One Man Inspired Elon Musk's Boldest Project Yet." Social media lit up with support, and people across the country were moved by his story. Donations began pouring in to support the initiative, and Arthur found himself thrust into a spotlight he'd never expected. But with the attention came challenges. Some critics questioned Elon's motives, accusing him of using Arthur as a publicity stunt. Others doubted the feasibility of the project, dismissing it as another billionaire's pipe dream. Arthur, however, refused to let the negativity deter him. "People are always going to have something to say," he told Elon. "What matters is we're doing something." As Arthur's profile grew, so did his opportunities. One morning, while reviewing plans with the team, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, he answered. "Arthur? It's me. Mary." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. Mary was his estranged daughter, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. After his wife's death, their relationship had fractured, and he'd always blamed himself for letting her down. "Mary," he said, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied softly. "I saw your speech. I had no idea what you'd been through. I want to see you." Tears welled in Arthur's eyes. "I'd like that." The following weekend, they met at a quiet cafe. Mary brought her 2 young children, and Arthur was overwhelmed with emotion as he met his grandchildren for the first time. "I thought I'd lost you," he told her. "You didn't lose me, Dad," she said, squeezing his hand. "I'm just glad I found you again." As the weeks turned into months, Arthur's life continued to transform. He became the public face of the initiative, speaking at events and advocating for policies to address homelessness. But he never forgot where he came from. He regularly visited shelters and spent time with people still living on the streets, listening to their stories and ensuring their voices were included in the project. One day he returned to the bridge where he used to sleep and found Terry, the young man he'd spoken to before all of this began. "Terry!" Arthur called out, approaching him. The younger man looked up, startled. "Arthur? Is that you? You look different." Arthur chuckled. "Guess I clean up all right, huh?" Terry grinned. "What happened to you?" Arthur sat beside him and shared his story. By the end, Terry was shaking his head in disbelief. "You're serious?" he asked. "As serious as it gets," Arthur said. "And I want to help you too." Terry hesitated, his eyes darting around nervously. "I don't know, man. I'm not like you, I'm just—" "Just like I was," Arthur interrupted. "And if I can do this, so can you." He handed Terry a card with his number on it. "Call me when you're ready." That evening, Arthur returned home, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He couldn't change the past, but he was finally building a future, one not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt forgotten. Arthur stood backstage at a massive event hall, adjusting the lapels of his blazer for the 5th time. The lights on the stage cast a warm glow, and the hum of voices from the crowd was nearly deafening. Elon Musk had spared no expense for the launch of their initiative, aptly named Project New Dawn. Arthur glanced at the teleprompter one last time, though he already knew his speech by heart. He took a deep breath, his nerves mounting. "You're going to do great," Elon said, placing a reassuring hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Just be yourself." Arthur nodded, though he wasn't sure if the advice comforted him. Still, the thought of everything this project represented pushed him forward. This wasn't about him. It was about the countless people still living the life he had barely escaped. The stage lights dimmed as Elon Musk walked out to thunderous applause. Cameras flashed as he began his speech, detailing the vision of Project New Dawn. "This is not just a charity," Elon explained. "This is a movement, a reimagining of how we address homelessness. Instead of temporary fixes, we're creating sustainable solutions. And none of this would have been possible without the inspiration and insight of one remarkable man." He turned toward the side of the stage and gestured for Arthur to join him. Arthur stepped out to a standing ovation, the sound both exhilarating and overwhelming. He paused, taking in the sea of faces before him, then approached the podium. "Thank you," Arthur began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "When Elon first told me about this project, I didn't believe someone like me could have a place in it. I mean, what could a homeless man possibly teach a billionaire? But then I realized something. The people who've lived through the problem are the ones who understand it best." He went on to describe the key features of Project New Dawn, the affordable solar-powered structures that could be quickly assembled in urban and rural areas, partnerships with companies to provide skills and employment opportunities for the homeless, spaces offering mental health services, addiction recovery programs, and legal assistance. "These aren't just ideas," Arthur said, his voice rising with conviction. "They're solutions designed by listening to the people who've been there." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I'm not standing here because I'm special. I'm standing here because one moment of kindness changed my life, and now I'm asking all of you to be part of that change for someone else." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. After the speeches, Elon unveiled a prototype of the modular housing unit on stage. The sleek, efficient design drew gasps from the crowd. "These units can be produced at a fraction of the cost of traditional housing," Elon explained. "And thanks to partnerships with companies like Tesla and SpaceX, we're launching the first communities within the next 6 months." Arthur couldn't help but marvel at the structure. It wasn't just a shelter. It was hope made tangible. The event dominated headlines with titles like "Elon Musk and former homeless man unveil bold plan to end homelessness." Arthur's speech became a viral sensation, drawing attention from activists, philanthropists, and everyday people alike. Donations flooded in, and governments around the world began inquiring about replicating the model. For the first time in years, homelessness wasn't just a statistic. It was a conversation, and Arthur was at the center of it. The success of Project New Dawn began to take shape quickly. The first community, located in downtown Los Angeles, became a pilot program for the initiative. Arthur visited the site regularly, overseeing the construction and speaking with future residents. One day, as Arthur walked through the nearly completed housing site, he spotted Terry. The young man had finally taken Arthur up on his offer and was now helping with the construction crew. "Terry!" Arthur called out, a grin spreading across his face. Terry waved, his expression a mix of pride and gratitude. "This is pretty cool, huh?" "More than cool," Arthur said. "This is just the beginning." As the first residents moved into their new homes, Arthur gave another speech at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. This time, he spoke directly to the public. "I used to think I was invisible," he said, "that no one cared about people like me. But what I've learned is that one small act of kindness can start a chain reaction. It started with me, and now it's spreading to all of you." He paused, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just my story. It's everyone's. And if we keep working together, we can make sure no one else feels invisible again." The crowd erupted into cheers, and Arthur stepped back, letting the moment sink in. As the ceremony wrapped up, Elon approached Arthur with a mischievous smile. "I've got something for you," Elon said, handing him a small box. Arthur opened it to find a set of keys. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "A home of your own," Elon replied. "Not one of the modular units, a real house just for you. It's near the site, so you can keep an eye on things." Arthur's throat tightened, and he struggled to find the words. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Elon said simply. That night, as Arthur stood in his new home, he thought about how far he'd come. From sleeping under a bridge to leading a movement, his life had been transformed in ways he never imagined. And yet, he knew this was just the beginning. The keys felt heavy in Arthur's hand as he stood on the front porch of his new home. The house was modest but beautiful, a small single story with a neatly trimmed lawn and a porch swing that creaked gently in the breeze. For a moment, Arthur hesitated, almost afraid to step inside. "This is yours," Elon had said earlier. "You've earned it." Taking a deep breath, Arthur turned the key and pushed the door open. The warm scent of fresh paint and polished wood greeted him. The living room was furnished simply but thoughtfully, with a cozy couch, a bookshelf, and a framed photo of a sunrise hanging on the wall. Arthur walked through the house slowly, taking in every detail. The small but functional kitchen, the neatly made bed, the bathroom with a proper shower. In the corner of the bedroom, he spotted a desk with a leather-bound notebook sitting on top. Curious, he opened it and found a handwritten note inside. "Arthur, this isn't just a house, it's a fresh start. Use this space to dream big and continue changing lives. Elon." Arthur closed the notebook, his throat tight with emotion. He sat down at the desk, staring out the window at the stars twinkling in the night sky. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. Arthur didn't let his new comforts slow him down. He threw himself into his work with Project New Dawn, ensuring the initiative expanded beyond Los Angeles. New communities were planned in San Francisco, Chicago, and even internationally, with governments and nonprofits eager to adopt the model. Arthur traveled to each site, meeting with local teams and speaking to residents. He shared his story with anyone who would listen, inspiring others to get involved. "I'm not special," he told one crowd. "I'm just someone who got a second chance. And now it's my job to make sure others get theirs too." His sincerity resonated with people everywhere. Donations and partnerships continued to pour in, and the initiative grew faster than anyone had expected. One afternoon, as Arthur was preparing for a trip to New York to speak at a conference, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he was stunned to see Terry standing there, clean-shaven and wearing a neatly pressed shirt. "Terry?" Arthur asked, a wide smile breaking across his face. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to say thanks," Terry said, his voice a little shaky. "Because of you, I'm working full-time now, and I've got a place of my own." "That's great to hear," Arthur said, pulling Terry into a hug. "I told you it was possible." Terry nodded, his eyes misty. "You didn't just help me. You made me believe I was worth helping." Arthur patted him on the back. "That's what this is all about, kid." Months later, Arthur was invited to Washington, D.C., where he was awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom for his work in combating homelessness. Standing on stage, he looked out at the crowd, his voice filled with gratitude. "This medal isn't just for me," he said. "It's for every person who's ever been told they don't matter. It's for everyone who's ever felt invisible. Together, we've shown that kindness and compassion can change the world." The applause was deafening, but Arthur stayed humble, shaking hands with everyone who approached him and thanking them for their support. On the anniversary of the night he met Elon Musk, Arthur returned to the bridge where his journey had begun. It was quiet now, the overpass no longer crowded with makeshift camps thanks to Project New Dawn. He stood in the same spot he had that night, staring at the spot where Elon's car had broken down. A sense of wonder washed over him. One moment of kindness had started all of this. As he turned to leave, he noticed a young woman sitting under the bridge, clutching a tattered blanket. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wary but curious. "Can I sit?" Arthur asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. Arthur sat beside her, offering her a bottle of water from his bag. "Let me tell you a story," he began. And so, Arthur shared his journey, planting a seed of hope in someone else's heart, just as someone had done for him. The bridge stood silent in the early evening light, the hum of traffic above blending with the occasional chirp of crickets. Arthur lingered there after sharing his story with the young woman, her wide-eyed curiosity reminding him of himself not long ago, unsure of the future, but yearning for change. As they parted ways, he found himself reflecting on the ripple effect that had brought him here. His life had become filled with unexpected moments, woven together by the threads of kindness and determination. He wasn't finished yet. Over the following months, Arthur began envisioning ways to build upon the success of Project New Dawn. The housing units and support programs had changed countless lives, but he knew the work was far from over. Homelessness wasn't a singular problem. It was tied to systemic issues like poverty, mental health, and substance abuse. Arthur scheduled a meeting with Elon Musk and the core team to pitch his next big idea. "This project is working," Arthur began, gesturing to charts and photos of the completed communities. "But we need to think bigger. It's not just about providing homes. It's about making sure people never end up homeless in the first place." He outlined a plan to create what he called Hope Hubs, multi-purpose centers that combined affordable housing with access to education, healthcare, childcare, and job placement services. "These hubs would act as a safety net," Arthur explained. "If we can catch people before they fall, we'll prevent so much suffering." The room was silent as the team absorbed his proposal. Finally, Elon leaned forward, a smile playing on his lips. "Arthur," he said, "I think you just came up with the next phase of this project." The pilot Hope Hub was set to launch in Chicago, a city with one of the highest homelessness rates in the country. Arthur worked closely with architects, social workers, and local officials to design the facility. The hub was a sprawling campus with modular apartments, classrooms, medical clinics, and even a daycare center. At the heart of the design was a community garden, a space where residents could grow food and connect with one another. "This isn't just a building," Arthur said during a press tour of the construction site. "It's a lifeline, a chance for people to rebuild their lives." As the project progressed, Arthur found himself grappling with a newfound sense of identity. For years, he had defined himself by his struggles, but now he was seen as a leader and an inspiration. It was a role he embraced, though it came with its own set of challenges. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Arthur sat in his living room, flipping through old photos he had found while reconnecting with his daughter, Mary. One picture in particular caught his attention, a snapshot of himself as a young man, standing beside his wife on their wedding day. He ran his finger over the faded image, a bittersweet smile on his lips. "I wish you could see this," he whispered. "I wish you could see how far we've come." The memory of his wife's encouragement, her belief in him even during the hardest times, fueled his determination to keep going. The grand opening of the Chicago Hope Hub was a monumental event, drawing media attention and community leaders from across the country. Arthur stood at the podium once more, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "This isn't about me," he began, addressing the crowd. "It's about all of us. Every person here has the power to make a difference, no matter where they come from or what they've been through." He gestured to a group of former homeless individuals who had been hired to work at the hub, their smiles lighting up the stage. "This is proof that no one is beyond hope," Arthur said, "and this is just the beginning." The success of the first Hope Hub led to plans for additional centers in cities like Detroit, Seattle, and Miami. But with growth came obstacles. Some local governments resisted the idea, citing budget constraints and public opposition. Arthur faced criticism from skeptics who claimed the initiative was unsustainable. Others accused him of being a pawn in Elon Musk's public relations machine. During a particularly contentious city council meeting in Miami, Arthur stood before a panel of officials who seemed intent on shutting down the project. "Why should we invest in this?" one council member asked. "What guarantees do we have that it'll work?" Arthur took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I can't give you guarantees," he admitted, "but I can give you my story. I can tell you what it feels like to be ignored, to feel like your life doesn't matter. And I can show you the faces of the people who've been lifted out of that darkness because someone took a chance on them." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This isn't about numbers or politics. It's about people, and if we don't step up, who will?" The room fell silent, and after a tense vote, the project was approved. As the Hope Hub model expanded, it began to draw international attention. Arthur was invited to speak at conferences in Europe and Asia, sharing the initiative's success and encouraging global collaboration. During a trip to India, he toured a sprawling slum in Mumbai and spoke with local leaders about adapting the Hope Hub concept to address poverty in their region. "This isn't just an American issue," Arthur said during a panel discussion. "Homelessness and poverty are universal problems, but so are compassion and ingenuity. If we work together, there's no limit to what we can achieve." Years later, Arthur sat on the porch of his home, watching the sun set over the city. The world had changed so much since the night he stopped to help Elon Musk on that deserted road. Project New Dawn and the Hope Hubs had become global movements, transforming millions of lives. Arthur had become a symbol of resilience and kindness, his name synonymous with hope. But he never let the accolades go to his head. To him, the real heroes were the people who had taken their second chances and used them to help others. One day, while walking through the neighborhood, Arthur spotted a young man sitting on a park bench, his head in his hands. Something about the man's posture reminded him of his own struggles. Arthur approached slowly. "Hey there," he said gently. "You okay?" The man looked up, his face etched with worry. I don't know where to go," he admitted. "I've been out of work for months, and I'm about to lose my apartment." Arthur sat down beside him. "I've been there," he said. "It's tough, but you don't have to face it alone." He handed the man a card with the address of the nearest Hope Hub. "Go here," Arthur said. "Tell them Arthur sent you. They'll help you get back on your feet." The man stared at the card, tears welling in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Arthur smiled, patting him on the shoulder. "Just paying it forward." Arthur passed away peacefully years later, surrounded by family and friends. His story lived on, immortalized in documentaries, books, and the countless lives he had touched. Elon Musk spoke at Arthur's memorial, his voice filled with emotion. "Arthur taught us that even the smallest act of kindness can spark a revolution," he said. "He was proof that no one is invisible, and everyone has the power to make a difference." Across the world, Hope Hubs continued to thrive, each one a testament to Arthur's vision. His legacy wasn't just the structures or programs, it was the belief that kindness could change the world. Arthur's story reminded people of the profound impact one moment of kindness can have. What began as a selfless act on a cold night became a catalyst for global change, proving that compassion knows no boundaries. Through Project New Dawn and the Hope Hubs, Arthur's legacy lives on in every life touched by his vision. He showed the world that no one is invisible, and that even the most broken paths can lead to extraordinary destinations. In the end, Arthur's life wasn't just a testament to survival, it was a beacon of hope, reminding us all to lift each other up. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing. I put a lot of time into crafting these heartfelt narratives, and your support means the world. Thank you for being part of this journey.